It is video about my book Material Space Theory, the collapse of the theories of Einstein, Bohr and Maxwell. This book is the greatest breakthrough in physics since Newton's time. Material space theory is not an addition to current false physics. This is the theory of everything, the first and the last. Modern physics has created a false image of a universe filled with emptiness. The adoption of the concept of empty space, introduced by Einstein due to the misinterpretation of several experiments, has plunged physics into a major crisis. It turned out that theories based on empty space were collapsing and had to be saved by prostheses that prevented the unification of physics. Physics became detached from physical phenomena and devolved into the mere fitting of equations to measurements. In this video, beyond the foundational concepts, we will walk through the exact mathematical derivations of all local predictions typically credited to general relativity. This includes the Schwarzschild radius, kinematic time dilation, gravitational time dilation, the deflection of light passing near a star, orbital precession, the photon sphere radius, and the Shapiro time delay. We will also resolve the twins paradox, which simply does not exist within material space theory. Crucially, this analysis allows us to reject general relativity even as a local approximation of material space theory. General relativity, even locally, preserves a non-existent abstract spacetime and the relativity of simultaneity. It only happens to accidentally derive a few formulas matching observations in highly specific scenarios, namely where the derivation relied solely on the two-way speed of light, which conveniently masks Einstein's foundational error. In those cases, general relativity merely mimics a simplified version of material space theory that ignores viscosity. Real material space theory, which accounts for viscosity, yields entirely different local predictions than general relativity. The definitive proof of this is the pioneer anomaly, the exact physical explanation of which can be found in my book. To give you an idea of the sheer scope of this framework, material space theory derives FMA and EMC2 from fundamental premises without invoking space-time, derives all local predictions of general relativity, derives the Tully-Fisher relation without dark matter explaining galaxy rotation, describes galaxy clusters and the bullet cluster without dark matter, describes black holes without singularities, derives gravitational wave equations, describes cosmology without dark matter or dark energy, derives Coulomb's law, Maxwell's equations, and electromagnetic wave equations, classically derives the Schrödinger and Dirac equations, and provides classical explanations for the double-slit experiment, the photoelectric effect, and Compton's scattering without the need to postulate photons. It is really theory of everything. The greatest deception propagated by modern physics is that general relativity was derived from the equivalence principle. It actually contradicts this principle. To hide this, Einstein invented several new versions of the equivalence principle. The original equivalence principle states that it is impossible to locally distinguish being in an accelerating reference frame from resting in a gravitational field with the same value of gravitational acceleration. This means that in both cases, we must be dealing with an identical physical situation. Consider an accelerating system containing only three elements: space, a body, and accelerated motion. Therefore, if we want to define gravity in a way that is consistent with the equivalence principle, these three concepts, space, a body, and accelerated motion, should be sufficient for this definition. There are very few possibilities. Gravity must consist of either the accelerated motion of space relative to a body resting in a gravitational field, or of the accelerated motion of a body relative to space. This is the first part of the definition. The second part concerns what actually accelerates relative to the center of a planet or star, whether the body moves upward while space remains stationary or space moves downward while the body rests on the surface. The first possibility, that the body accelerates upward while space is stationary, can be rejected because it would lead to the conclusion that the planet should swell, meaning expand, as a result of such motion. However, we do not observe this. Thus, the only possibility consistent with the equivalence principle and observations remains. Gravity is the accelerated motion of space toward mass, that is, toward a planet or star. Space is not a background, but an active, moving medium. The equivalence principle is experimentally confirmed and gravity exists. If the presented definition of gravity is the only one that can be built solely from the concepts of space, a body and accelerated motion, and is consistent with observations, it must be treated as physically privileged. Any theory of gravity that requires rejecting this definition actually rejects the equivalence principle itself in its most direct physical interpretation. If space moves and interacts with bodies, it must be material. In that case, it is a medium in which waves, including light, propagate. Like any wave in a medium, light has a constant speed relative to that medium, not relative to any arbitrary frame of reference. This contradicts Einstein's assumption about the constancy of the one-way speed of light in every inertial frame, and the principle of relativity on which special relativity is based is false because there is a preferred frame associated with space. From this point of view, Einstein's theory is not a consistent development of the equivalence principle, but relies on two additional, unverifiable postulates: the constancy of the one-way speed of light in every direction and in every inertial frame, and the principle of relativity in its specific symmetrical form. The material space theory is not the same as Hamilton's river model because Hamilton, just like Einstein, retained the postulate of the constant one-way speed of light. Material space theory rejects this postulate and assumes that the medium of space is privileged rather than any arbitrary inertial frame. Having no arguments against this theory, critics ask what happens to the absorbed space, imposing specific preconceptions onto space. The lack of an answer to this question changes nothing in the definition of gravity, because rejecting this only definition consistent with the equivalence principle would mean either that gravity does not exist, which is an absurdity, or that the equivalence principle is false. From this point on, any arguments against this theory can only prove that we are using false physics or false concepts, and that is exactly what is happening. Modern physics uses a false definition of gravity, a false definition of mass, a false definition of motion, and a false conception of the influence of viscosity on the motion of bodies. Gravity is the accelerated motion of material space toward a planet or star, which is the only definition of gravity consistent with the literal text of the original equivalence principle. Mass is the process of absorbing space, and matter consists of bound, stable states of space. That is why the movement of space affects everything in the same way, including measuring instruments, something the proponents of current false physics fail to understand. Light moves relative to space at a constant speed and is carried along by space like a boat on a river. All light-related phenomena depend on the speed of space, which is equal to the escape velocity. Bodies with mass react only to the acceleration of space, not to its density or viscosity, which is equal to gravitational acceleration. Therefore, in the absence of other forces, they possess the acceleration of space. Space possesses viscosity, but it does not drag or slow down bodies. It is responsible only for the interaction of space with itself, and it can affect matter or light only indirectly by modifying the flow of space. Matter consists of centers that absorb space, and motion is not the pushing aside of space by a foreign body, but the additional absorption of space in front of it to take its place, and the ejection of this excess from the other side, closer to the movement of a spatial concentration or a soliton. In uniform motion, in addition to the space the body absorbs at rest, the amount of space additionally absorbed in front and ejected in the rear is equal. Whereas in accelerated motion, it is greater in front and smaller in the rear, which generates the resistance of space. As you can see right here in my book, Material space theory explicitly derives every single local prediction that general relativity claims as its own. We are talking about the Schwarzschild radius, kinematic and gravitational time dilation, light deflection, orbital precession, the photon sphere, and the Shapiro time delay. But look closely at the equations on your screen. There are no tensor matrices here. There is no curved space-time geometry, no Christoffel symbols, no Ricci curvature tensors. Material space theory solves these exact localized anomalies using pure fluid kinematics, vector triangles, and Tanghelini-based clock modifications inside a moving physical space. This exposes a massive truth that mainstream physics has ignored. General relativity is not a local approximation of reality. It is a mathematical illusion that only happens to mimic material space theory by sheer accident. In every single local test where Einstein's math works, like the light deflection or the Shapiro delay formulas shown here, the mainstream derivations rely strictly on the two-way round-trip speed of light. In a loop, the mathematical error of ignoring a moving space cancels itself out, masking Einstein's fundamental flaw. General relativity simply strips away the physical viscosity of space and replaces it with abstract geometry. But the moment you look at the true one-way physical flow of space, Einstein's house of cards collapses. In material space theory, the twins' paradox simply does not exist because there is absolutely no symmetry between the two twins. The twin who moves faster relative to the absolute material space is the one who will age slower and be younger upon return. Because modern physics has introduced countless convoluted, false attempts to explain away this non-existent paradox using both special and general relativity, we must look at the hard truth. Acceleration has absolutely nothing to do with it. The only physical metric that dictates clock slowing is the absolute velocity relative to the material space medium. When we incorporate viscosity material space theory and general relativity yield entirely different local predictions. The definitive proof of this is the famous pioneer anomaly, a cosmic mystery that mainstream physics swept under the rug, but which material space theory solves explicitly through the internal friction of space itself. I have detailed the exact mechanics of this anomaly, along with the classical derivations of FMR, EMC2, Maxwell's equations, and the Schrödinger and Dirac equations, right here in the text. For those who want to review the full mathematical architecture of the first and last theory of everything, the link to the book is in the description below. Now I will show parts of the book containing the derivation of all the local predictions of general relativity. In other words, the experiments intended to prove the validity of general relativity simultaneously serve as proof of a theory that is fundamentally incompatible with both general and special relativity. This means that the testing of both theories will take place on the scale of galaxies.